Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Learn Linux TV. And also, welcome back to my Netdata course. We're up to video number 5 at this point, which means we're more than halfway through the series, but the best is yet to come. In this video, we're going to see how Netdata can help us with logs. We've already seen how Netdata can benefit us when it comes to metrics and charts, but logging is also important. In fact, when it comes to troubleshooting disasters, logs can single-handedly make or break success when it comes to diagnosing the root cause of whatever we might be dealing with. And logging is one of many things that Netdata can help us out with. In fact, there's a built-in systemd journal plugin that can display logs right from within Netdata's dashboard, and we're going to check it out in today's video. First, let's talk about Netdata's systemd journal plugin. This is actually a new feature within Netdata, and it's something that I covered early last year as soon as this feature was released. But before I dive into that, I want to recap what exactly I mean by journal. When I refer to journal in this context, I'm referring to something that's part of systemd. Systemd is the init system that's used by the majority of Linux systems nowadays, and it's something I've covered quite a bit in other videos. When an application such as Apache or Nginx writes information to your system's logs, it's written to systemd's journal. You could use the journalctl command to view logging details on any server that utilizes systemd as its init system. For a quick example of this, I could view logging info from a service like OpenSSH by entering the following command. I'll type journalctl, which is the command that you primarily use on any system that features systemd to view the journal. I want to narrow the output to a particular unit, and the unit in this case is going to be SSH. Obviously, you can replace SSH with some other service if you have something else running, but what I'll do is press enter on this command right here. Here I see logging entries specific to the OpenSSH service on this particular instance. Now I'm not going to go into any more detail than that when it comes to the journal on Linux, since I've covered it in other videos. And when it comes to our course, systemd's journal isn't specific to Netdata. However, I wanted to show a quick example for context purposes. So what exactly does that have to do with Netdata? Well, as of last year, Netdata is able to analyze and display data directly from your system's journal, so you can benefit not only by having access to that within Netdata itself, but also being able to correlate problem areas with details that exist in the logs. This makes it a lot easier to pinpoint the root cause of things. And you know what? Let's see it in action. While you're logged into Netdata Cloud, you could visit the Logs tab right here. So I'll click on Logs. And here we can view log entries from systemd's journal, right here within Netdata. And you can see quite a bit of information here when you go to this tab. For example, we see the host name right here in this column. This tells us from which system a particular log entry came from. And it's important to note that the information you see here is the same information that you'd see if you were to check the logs manually on one of your servers, just like you saw me do earlier. What Netdata is doing is streaming this information into the console, so that way you can view logging info for all of your servers in one place. You can certainly use the journalctl command to view logging info directly on each of your servers, but this is much easier since all of your servers are logging information right here. At this point, I want us to take a moment and think of the potential use cases here. Like I mentioned before, the information that you see here is coming directly from your servers. If you have an actual issue that you're troubleshooting, it's often the case that whatever you're dealing with will impact more than one server. For an example of this, consider a hypothetical situation where a number of servers contain information in the logs that complain about an application not being able to access configuration data. After troubleshooting this, perhaps you'll discover that the NFS service is stopped on your storage server. If you have more than one server that depends on a connection to an NFS share, then you're going to have more than one server complaining about the same thing. Without a solution like Netdata, you might inspect one single server, whichever is the first one to complain. Then you notice another server is also complaining, and you log into that one as well. After a while, you'll have multiple terminal windows open trying to figure out what exactly is going on. If you were to troubleshoot from within Netdata instead, you could search for NFS in the search box and find correlating data immediately and discover that more than one server is impacted before you even reach for a terminal. Another and more serious example is if you ever deal with a security breach. Whenever a threat actor gains access to your infrastructure, it's important to know whether or not the individual has gained access to other servers. This is known as lateral movement, and it's a very common practice. Once a threat actor gains access to one server, they immediately try to jump to another, and so on. Perhaps a threat actor only makes it into one server, or maybe they were able to access a few dozen. Either way, when you're dealing with a cybersecurity incident, you need to determine all the places that particular individual has been. By correlating log data, you can search for usernames or other related information to determine which systems were accessed. Since Netdata Cloud is streaming logging info into one place, it makes the whole process a lot easier. And this also brings us back to Netdata's Monitor Anything approach. Since Netdata is taking information from systemd's journal as is and displaying it here for us, that also means you don't have to train Netdata on how to display logging info. For instance, consider this app, Configamajig. I bet you've probably never heard of it, and that's because it's not something that I've released publicly. I did talk about it in a previous video, but it's actually my internal configuration management solution, something I've literally built in-house. Because Netdata is just showing me the information as is, anything that's logged to systemd's journal is going to show up here. And I've configured my particular application to show logs in systemd's journal, so I will be able to find information regarding Configamajig right here, even though it's not a traditional app that Netdata would expect to find or even have configuration for. And since I haven't released it publicly, there's no way that Netdata would be able to know about it. Again, since the application is writing logs to systemd's journal, and Netdata is able to show logs from the journal, I'll be able to see information for that particular app right here. In fact, what I'll do right here in the search box is I'll type the word provision. The script that runs when Configamajig does what it does is called provision. That's the name of the service. And when I type that here, we can see information regarding my configuration management solution. For example, if I don't change any configuration at all with my app, it doesn't run. So right here is telling me that the repository has not changed, so it's just going to quit out and not do anything. However, if it does run, I'll see this line right here. This is the actual command that the provision script runs. As you can see right here, Netdata is showing information regarding Configamajig, again, something that it wouldn't normally know about. And you just saw me type in a search term here in the search box, so if you're looking for something else, for example, SSH, I'll just type that right here, we'll see information that pertains to SSH. Now here we're seeing information pertaining to Configamajig again, and it uses SSH, at least for authentication, so you're going to see that right here. But again, you could use the search box right here to search for anything you're curious about. In addition to that, if you're curious about a particular server, what you could do is narrow down the list right here by simply typing the name of the server. So for example, my Raspberry Pi, I'm seeing information for that already, but I could search for the host name right here and it'll show me information that pertains to that particular server. Also, right here on the right-hand side, we have a list of servers. So if I wanted to see logs that pertain to a particular server, all I have to do is click on it. So I'll click on my SyncThing server right here, for example, and you'll notice it's going to show me systemd's journal for this particular server. We can see in the host name that it's my SyncThing server all the way down. So I was able to narrow down the output to just that server by simply clicking on it. Anyway, what I recommend that you do at this point is just experiment a little bit here before we move on to the next section. You can click on nodes. You could also go down here to journal sources. You can narrow it down by that as well. And there's quite a bit of information here. So what I recommend you do, again, is just have some fun with this. Think of a service that you use in your infrastructure. Try to search for it. Try to see logging information for a particular server. And then once you're ready, we'll move on to the next section. Next, let's take a moment and discuss how we could deal with logging entries that are not within systemd's journal. Earlier, I mentioned that the majority of Linux distros have switched to systemd, and while that's true, it's also the case that not every application that you might run writes entries to the journal even when it's being run on a systemd system. A great example of this is our syslog. While it's out of scope for this series to discuss this in more detail, I'm going to summarize it a bit so that way you'll better understand the situation around logging in regard to Linux. Previously, every server app that you might run wrote clear text logging entries to files within the /var/log directory. This wasn't necessarily a bad thing, and the way a system administrator would work through a problem would be to inspect log files within that directory for clues. For example, if you were running a web server such as Apache, You'd find Apache's log files within the var log directory, and you could go in there and inspect the log files to find out what's going on. Later on, when systemd was introduced, Linux distributions that adopted it also changed how log entries were written to the system. Instead of text-based entries like you have with our syslog, there'd be data written to binary log files. Binary logs are different than text logs in the way that the data is written. For example, one text log entry could span multiple lines, others just one line, and sometimes that can make it hard to figure out where one entry begins and another ends. But also, with binary logs, they're faster to produce, and the way that they're formatted gives you additional features when compared to text-based logs. Where the problem begins is that even though most distros have switched to systemd, and thus binary logging, some applications haven't been updated yet and will still write text-based entries to /var/log. In addition, not every developer is on board with binary logs, and some of them might not even be working on adopting the new format at all. This means that as a Linux admin, you'll be dealing with both binary and text logs for the foreseeable future. Most of what you'll be working with will be binary logs going forward, with an occasional app or two that still uses the old format. Now let's bring this back to Netdata. With the built-in systemd journal plugin within Netdata, as soon as you install it, it's gathering your logging information immediately. There's no need for you to configure anything. Netdata just does this by default. When it comes to text-based logs, though, Netdata is not going to show that information by default. And this isn't really a big deal because you'll only be dealing with a few apps using the old methods every now and then, so the fact that Netdata doesn't do this won't really impact you that much. Still, even though some apps are stuck writing text logs, you'd likely still benefit from Netdata showing that information along with everything else. And that's where log2journal comes into play. Log2journal is a built-in application that gets installed whenever you install Netdata. It's not something that's going to work automatically like the majority of other things within Netdata. This one needs to be run manually. What log2journal is a tool that enables you to configure a logging pipeline to help get data out of text-based logs and into the journal. This means that you could grab text logs from an app and literally have them converted into binary logs. And once you do that, Netdata will show that information along with everything else. So let's see an example of log2journal in action. And for the example, what I'm going to do is switch over to the web server that we set up earlier in the series. And this particular server is running Nginx. We can see that it's not running in this case, so what I'll do is just start it up. I'll enable it, and then I'll also use -- now to make it start right now. So I'll check the status again. Let's recall the previous command. And we see that Nginx is active and it's running. And it's also enabled. Anyway, what I'll do is go into the /var/log directory. And here we see we have a directory for Nginx. And as an example of text-based logs and what they contain, I'll just go ahead and cat out the contents of one of those log files. I'll need to use sudo because by default, at least on this system, those particular log files don't have access at the user level. But anyway, as you can see here, inside that file, we have some logging entries. Again, these are text-based logs, something that we've been using when it comes to Linux for pretty much forever. Also, you'll notice that each of these files end in .log, which is very common when it comes to text-based log files. That's not always the case though, but it is common. Now, as I mentioned earlier, text-based logs will not show up in Netdata. So we have a situation where we have an outlier that's not writing data to the systemd's journal, so that's why Netdata is not going to know about it. But here's how we can get this information into the journal anyway, which effectively makes Netdata also able to start paying attention to it. Since those log files are protected, I'll just switch over to the root user. To see this in action, what I'll do is type an example command that's going to take information from text-based logs and forward that to binary logs. And here's an example command that's using log2journal. Again, log2journal is a utility that you could use to grab text-based logs and forward them to systemd's journal. And this example should be fairly straightforward when I break it down. What we're doing here is we're using the tail command to follow log output. As I mentioned a few times in other tutorial videos where I went over this, follow mode allows us to view new lines inside a text file as they're written. If you've seen my video that covers the head and tail commands, then this is just a refresher for you. For those of you that haven't seen that video, tail is an essential command and you may as well check it out. But to summarize it for now, the tail command gives you the last 10 lines of a file by default, and the "F" option will continue to show new lines as the file is updated. What we're doing here is instead of showing the output of the tail command in standard output to the terminal, we're instead sending that to the log2journal command. And since the log2journal command copies the information into the journal, Netdata will start showing this information in the logs tab immediately. The thing is, there's all kinds of different applications that you might be running, so how you actually go about this differs from one app to the next, as each app will log information into its own specific directory and file name. So it's impossible to show everything here, but there's a great article on Netdata's documentation site that gives you more specific examples that you can use to formulate your own logging pipeline for an app should you need it. But the important takeaway here is that when it comes to binary logs, Netdata handles that automatically, so there's nothing you need to do here. When it comes to text-based logs, those are usually a bit more specific per app and may take some testing and workflow adjustments that would be outside the scope of this video. But the thing is, it's important to be aware that this functionality exists for those of you that might need this kind of thing. But actually, another thing to take note of is that log2journal isn't even the only way to accomplish this. What I'm going to do in the next section is show you another tool that helps you write logging entries into the journal. In the previous section, we took a look at a way we can handle a situation where we're dealing with text-based logs and how we can get Netdata to show information as well. Using log2journal, you could cause text-based logs to become systemd journal entries, which Netdata supports by default. That tool was supplied by Netdata, and it was made available as soon as you installed the Netdata agent. In this section, what we're going to do is take a look at another tool supplied by Netdata that serves the same purpose, systemd-cat. And yes, Netdata supplies two tools that do the same thing. But the difference with systemd-cat is that it's built into systemd itself. This means that even though it was developed by Netdata, it was included upstream inside systemd itself. This means that even if you never install Netdata on a server, you'll still have access to systemd-cat because it's literally built into systemd. And I think it's so cool that Netdata developed something and had it upstreamed into systemd itself, which means everyone can benefit from it, not just Netdata users. Anyway, to see it in action, what we could do is create a sample log entry with the following command. So what I'll do is type printf message, and then I'll set that equal to hello world /n for a line break. I'm going to type priority. I'm going to set that equal to 6. And then /n twice for 2 line breaks. Then I'm going to end the double quote right here. And I'm going to pipe that into systemd cat native, just like that. And here we're using printf to print hello world with a priority of 6. We're piping the standard output from that command into input for systemd cat native. This causes a log entry to get created, and we'll see that directly in Netdata. Another thing we could do is send multi-line log entries to the systemd journal, and what I'll do right now is type a command example that'll show you how that works. So again, I'll type printf, begin double quotes, message equals, and then I'll type hello, and then -- new line in caps, -- and then world /n for a new line. I'm going to set the priority. I'm going to set that to 6 /n for 2 line breaks. And the double quotes, I'm going to pipe that into systemd cat native. And I'm going to give it the option -- new line, then equal sign. And then in single quotes, I'll type -- new line, -- and then the other single quote. And this might be a bit confusing at first, but it's actually not that bad once I break it down. With the printf command, we're including -- new line -- in between hello and world. This hasn't been defined yet, but what's going on is that we're setting that up right here, where we associate -- new line to the string -- new line -- This is an option specific to the printf command, and isn't necessarily specific to Netdata, but we're using it here. The result of this is that we'll see a new line printed in the output within Netdata itself. So at this point, you saw two methods for getting logging information into systemd's journal. I really like the fact that systemd cat exists. It's neat that Netdata wrote something that isn't really specific to their own solution and is available in all systemd distributions since it's been pushed upstream. But since Netdata has made it available to us, we could definitely weigh the pros and cons of both of the solutions that I mentioned in this section. My recommendation is to experiment with both and see which one you like best. And depending on what you want to accomplish, you'll determine the appropriate pipeline to use. And there you go. That about does it for episode number 5. I really hope you enjoyed it. In this particular episode, we took a look at logging. If you're a system administrator, you're already probably very familiar with logging, but the ability to see all of our logging information right from within the Netdata dashboard is really cool. Anyway, in the next video, what we're going to do is take a look at alerting. It's another important aspect of system administration, and it's something that Netdata can facilitate for us. So as soon as you're ready, I'll meet you over in that video. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to click the like button to let YouTube know. And then when you're ready to move on, I'll meet you in the next lesson.